Hi, Cody the Boy here with,
Bryson Howard.
and today we're interviewing
Glenn Sheathelm.
for our Patriotism project. Well, we have a few questions for you today, if you don't mind answering them. First one is, where and when were you born?
Born in March of 1946 here in Muskegon. I was actually named after an uncle that was killed during World War II.
Oh, wow. What were you doing before you entered the service?
Well, let's see, before I entered the service, I went to Muskegon High School. I played in the band there. And then went to Michigan Tech for a year, which is in the Upper Peninsula. I wasn't sure the program I was in at Michigan Tech was what I really wanted to do. So I thought, well, I felt I ought to do military service, and I figured, well, I might as well do it now, and then go ahead and use the GI Bill to go back to college afterwards. So I went down and enlisted for airborne artillery, which they thought was rather unusual. Most people were looking for some way to stay away from where the fighting was, but I went down and enlisted for airborne artillery, knowing that it would at least put me in a good unit, which that one was. And that was actually the second unit I served in during the service time, but that was the combat unit.
Wow. And which branch of military did you serve?
Served in the Army, went for basic training at Fort Knox, Kentucky, and then went for artillery school at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. Fort Knox, Kentucky, that's where we, did our basic stuff and learned how to shoot rifles and marched around and so forth. At Fort Sill, Oklahoma, that's where we learned about the artillery pieces, figuring data, how high the guns had to be pointed and so forth, so that when you fired the cannon shells, they came down where they were supposed to.
Wow.
And then from there, my first assignment was in Nuremberg, Germany. I was with the 34th Artillery over there. When I got off the train, I called the phone number that was up on the board there that said, new arrivals call this number, and told them I was there, and they came and picked me up with a truck, and they dropped me off under this big stone archway. And I grabbed my duffel bag, and the hair kind of stood up on the back of my neck. It was something weird about the place. And anyway, the truck drove away after he told me where I had to go in order to get to the billeting area I was supposed to go to. And I walked out of the archway and then looked back over my shoulder, and there was a big balcony over the top of the archway. And I remembered seeing a program called 20th Century, which Walter Cronkite used to do. It was a history program that was on Sunday nights of, you suppose, standing there like this.
Oh.
Hitler. Then when I started looking around, I thought, not only have I seen this on the news, but I know what it is. It's the SS Communications Training Center that the artillery unit was using it.
Oh, jeez.
And the walls were, probably about that thick, stone walls,
Wow.
and just a huge place.
Wow. Now, did you enlist or were you drafted?
I enlisted. That was, a 3-year enlistment. Now, one thing that most people find amazing is that during the Vietnam War, a higher percentage of people enlisted than did during World War II. Most people figure, World War II is the great war to end all wars, and, great patriotic war and so forth. And but actually, there were a much higher percentage of draftees during World War II than there were during Vietnam.
Wow. How many years did you serve?
3 years.
Wow. And
Where did you serve when you were?
Well, like I said, the first tour was in Germany, and we had 155 self-propelled howitzers. They're 27-ton vehicles that look like tanks. Actually, there's a picture of one quite similar to that over here on Getty Street as you come in. It's got, the Continental Teledyne, or L3 Communications. But the 155 artillery piece can fire 96-pound projectile. And anyway, I started out driving that, and then worked to the gunner slot, and when I left, I was section chief on the gun.
Wow.
And we went to places like Grafenwehr, where it's a big field training area where we could actually shoot those. You know, you couldn't shoot them around Nuremberg. We had areas that we could go ahead and drive them through the woods and down slippery slopes and stuff, but you know, we couldn't actually shoot the guns anywhere near Nuremberg. Now, Nuremberg is where the Nazi Party rallies took place prior to World War II, and also that's where the war crimes trials were held at the end of World War II.
Wow. And if you were on the front lines,
Well, okay, now, that, in Vietnam, I did get, like with 1st Cavalry Division, I was originally working with Artillery 2nd and 19th. And one of the things we did, we went and did village sick call programs. And we'd go to different villages and, you know, clean up the cuts and scrapes, because if you've got a war on, you got all kinds of jagged metal laying around on the ground. And these kids walking barefoot in the rice paddies and stuff were always getting cuts that would get infected. We'd go ahead and clean those up and take care of them with antibiotics.
Wow.
And also 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, I was in an underground bunker, and I had a bunch of maps where I would keep track where the enemy forces were and where our forces were, so that we didn't make a mistake and put artillery fire on our own troops by mistake. Now, I did that for the first 11 months that I was over there. This is another picture of village sick call, and you notice that, you know, the kids don't look, you know, frightened of the Americans. The relationship between the civilians and the American troops was really pretty good. Now, I heard all kinds of horror stories about kids being wrapped up with explosives and being sent to kill Americans. I never saw that over there, and I cannot verify it with any incident that took place in the whole 1st Brigade, 1st Cav. And I worked intelligence and operations, so I would have been privy to that information if it was actually happening. If it happened some other place in Vietnam, I'm not saying it didn't, you know, there is that possibility, because in Vietnam, you could live a whole bunch of different lifestyles depending on what your job was. Now, when I was working with Headquarters 2nd and 19th, lived in tents and underground bunkers, and we had a perimeter around the outside, and occasionally we would get mortared, but generally we were not in any degree of heavy fighting. Other units, like some of the infantry units and Marine Corps, they would be out for 3 weeks at a time, kicking bushes to find enemy soldiers and have their battles with them. And then at the other extreme end, there were guys that worked on radars for F-4 Phantoms, and they lived in air-conditioned barracks. They worked in air-conditioned offices. They had fans that, you know, moved the air, so they didn't have to worry about dust getting in these electronics things they were working on. So a lot depends on what you did. I mean, when I got to Vietnam, it was probably about 6 or 8 weeks later. We went to a place called Quinh Nhân, and they had a dining hall there, and we went to get some lumber and, you know, heavy timbers and stuff for building bunkers. And anyway, I was a little late getting there because I had to stop and talk to an officer at a radio control, you know, center on the way in. And I got there, and I'm walking through the line, and everybody has stopped eating, and they're all watching as we go through the line with our rifles over our shoulders, our hand grenades all hanging around our belts. It wasn't room for all of us to sit at the same table, so I sat with some other guys that, you know, were from the unit that was normally based there. And I said, "Do you mind if I join you?" And I said, "Oh, sure." And so I went ahead and hung my suspenders with grenades and all the other stuff over the back of the chair, my rifle over the chair, slid my helmet underneath, And they're looking at me, they said, "Are those real grenades?" And I said, "I wouldn't be carrying them if they weren't." And I said, "By the way, where's your rifle?" Because in the 1st Cavalry Division, we had to have a rifle and 2 magazines with us all the time,
Wow.
no matter where we went. I mean, if you were going to the outhouse at night, you'd better have your
Really?
helmet and rifle and 2 magazines. And so I said, "Where are your rifles?" Well, the guy pulls out a billfold and looks, and he's got a card. It's got a serial number on it. And so, you know, these guys were not, obviously, people who were going to be in fights on a very frequent basis. Now, I mentioned about the village sick calls. This girl warned us once when we were walking into an ambush,
Oh.
and the Viet Cong came out from behind one of the huts, shot at her, was a little high, missed me too. I knocked her down behind a log, and then, you know, set the M60 machine gun across the log, and anyway, we had our little battle there, but this particular girl, you know, actually ran out and warned us on it. Now, as the fight went on, at first, some of the other guys in the unit didn't shoot back, and I had to actually yell at them a couple times.
Oh.
You know, they, you know, they were not used to this type of thing where they would run into those firefights, but I'd been out with long-range patrols, so I had done a little of that. And there was a Viet Cong that was behind a well, and he went and was shooting at us, and I went ahead and tried to get a shot at him, couldn't, and I ran out of shells in this little short belt to the M60 machine gun, because it was just a starter strip of about maybe 10 or 12 rounds. Then you had another belt of 100 that I was, you know, supposed to hook to it. Well, I'd forgotten to hook it up, so I had to lift the top cover and put it in. About that time, this Viet Cong ran from the well towards one of the huts, and I shot him as he went into the door of the hut, but what I couldn't see was there was a young boy inside, probably about 12 years old, and one of my M60 machine gun bullets hit him at the elbow, so it probably crippled the kid. It probably just amputated his arm. And the thing is, I couldn't see him because it was dark in the hut, and, you know, it was sunshine out where the fight was taking place, and I didn't, you know, I couldn't see the kid in there, but that kind of bothered me for a while. That, you know, okay, you teach hunter safety and you watch, you know, the target and what's beyond, and it took a while to realize that I really couldn't see what was beyond on that one.
Yeah.
Now, also, when I was working in intelligence and operations, I mentioned about some of the short-range recon patrols. This is my M16. This is Rufus Benford's M79. This was a skull that we picked up. Rufus he'd been over there for a while. He killed a Viet Cong with a hatchet. And, you know, he was considered to be a little bit beyond the pale at times. And as we came back in, he had that skull underneath his arm like this, and he's petting the top of the skull. The guys on the perimeter, oh, whoa. He's kind of weird. And I said, "Okay, Rufus, now what are we going to do with this skull?" And he said, "Well, you can put it on top of your radio in the command center." And I said, "I get along just fine with Major Gillespie. I'm not going to put that skull on top of my radio."
You mind if I hold this picture up for the camera?
Yeah. And anyway, Rufus said, "Well, set it up, you know, like this near where I slept." And he said, "More of the guys can see it because they go past there to go to the tent where they serve food." So I did. One day there was a guy that came by and he said, "Can I have your skull?" "Fine. What the skull for?" And he said, "Well, I got a letter from my girlfriend I've been sending money to, and she's found somebody else." This was just before Christmas, 1966. And anyway, so I asked Rufus, I said, "Is it okay if we give him the skull?" Rufus said, "Fine." So some girl back in the United States got this as a Christmas present. The girl that had sent this guy the Dear John letter. There's a certain sort of black humor, you know, that sometimes get to in combat. Now, Vietnam, you may have heard, was you know, mostly flat race paddies. There were some areas that were like that. This happens to be a place called LZ Laramie. They would land the helicopters down here and unload the stuff and haul it up in kind of like a quad runner type vehicle. And then they'd bring the artillery rounds up to the guns from there. And if you're going down towards the borderline, you know, Tennessee, Georgia, there you'll see lots of signs that say Sea Rock City. It's an amusement park. So one of the guys apparently from down that area decided to paint Sea Rock City on the rock piles.
Wow.
Okay, this is Captain Alcanado. He was my company commander. This is me at that time when I was his artillery forward observer. Now, that meant that those last 4 months I was out with the company. Whenever they were out, they'd come in about every 3 weeks and wash up and stuff, but I'd stay out in the field with them. He's using his map there, figuring out where the ambushes are going to be. I'm waiting for him to tell me which ambush I'm going to go with that night. And he and I still correspond back and forth. There's a number of us that do from our unit, which is kind of neat with some of the guys, because, you know, you can verify what actually went on. He used to brag to all the other officers. He said, "Oh yeah, my artillery FO got a whole battalion of North Vietnamese at night." And, well, a battalion would be about 500 guys, but it really wasn't that many. It was actually 160. But the North Vietnamese had made a mistake during Tet Offensive, 1968. They had come south. They had some pre-placed supplies in a valley just below this hillside. Well, we had found this particular hillside, and the fact that they'd staked it out for where people were supposed to assemble. And this was a couple days before they got there. So I looked at this and wrote all of it down in my notebook. And 2 days later, at night, there's a whole bunch of flashlights all over the hill, about 100 of them. And Tiger 8, this is Tiger 2-2 Mike, have a fire mission, figured North Vietnamese rocket battery in the open, setting up. And I said, what have I got available for a time on target? They assigned 4 artillery batteries, in other words, 24 cannons that pounded that area for 5 minutes, and that's why the body count was what it was, you know. And of course these guys didn't know where we were. They had no idea. It was just all of a sudden out of the dark sky, there's all these explosions about 20 feet off the ground. And you know, so he used to brag about that to some of the other officers how he had that particular fire mission. Now, sometimes we walked from one place to another, but sometimes we went by helicopter.
Oh, wow.
And that's inside of the helicopter and sit in the middle jump seat. Our helicopters didn't always fare too well. There was one of them shot down. Everybody on that survived. And then they picked it up with a CH-47, which is a twin-rotored helicopter like this, and brought it back to LZ English. Now, this is not just a cargo carrying helicopter. Normally, it wouldn't have this and the guns sticking out of the side here, but they would, you know, had a big hook on the bottom where they could lift up big sling loads of stuff. They could carry a 105 artillery piece, in other words, a cannon, and basic load of ammunition plus that cannon's gun crew on that one helicopter. So in other words, it could fly someplace. They'd go ahead and hit the button so the hook released. They'd land next to that. About 8 guys would come running out of the back, and 2 guys for fire direction control. And in 5 or 6 minutes, they'd be shooting.
Wow.
And this is also a picture out of a helicopter. This is Highway 1 ran parallel to the coast on